Okay, hello everyone in part one. It's been a little while since I've probably spoken to you, so I wanted to do a little bit of an end of term review for the PAD portfolio because the portfolio is one of those odd tasks that actually spans the sort of full academic years, I suppose, or the first 3 academic years. The summer's always a key time for the portfolio because it's a good chance for you to catch up with any work that you have outstanding. Obviously, the timeline for the portfolio, it kind of runs from October to October. In terms of when work needs to be completed. So I know a lot of you, when I've spoken to many students in the past and some of you guys, you don't need to cram it in around exams, but it is some pieces of work that you do need to do. Okay, please do not forget the portfolio. If you've spoken to any of the students in part 3, they're going to give you any advice. They're going to say, do not forget to do your portfolio work. Do not leave it until part 3 because it just gives you so much extra work to do when you're busy in part 3. Use your downtime. Now, this isn't me saying that I want you to spend your entire summers working as well, because I know you need some rest as well. But this is to give a bit of an update about where you should be, what you can do over the next sort of coming months before we get into part 2. All right. So be kind of a shortish video, just kind of give some of the background information, some base information. So if you're not knowing where to start, this is always a good place. So congratulations for making it to the end of term. I know it's been a kind of unusual term, I suppose, or an unusual year at least. So well done for making it this far. Obviously, it's not the end of the road for you guys. You are only in part 1, so you do have a fair way to go yet, but it's good to get to this point in the process now, and then we can obviously think about how we move forward from here. So step 1 kind of complete. You've got through your exams. I know you haven't got your results yet, but let's not worry about that just yet, and let's make sure you've prepared yourself moving forward for the rest of the course. I always like this time of year because it's a good time to take stock, both for you and for myself. So it's always a good time when the majority of the heavy lifting or the hard work's kind of done, and you can actually look at what it is you've learned, what you need to sort of gain, and how we kind of move forward, just so you're best prepared for the future years as we go there. So I always use it as a good time to assess how the year has gone. It's good for you to reflect back, and it's again not just looking at the positives. You can look at the negatives of things that you found difficult, which I'm sure there are. All of us will be able to comment on those as well. And it does give you some time to complete any work that you have outstanding. If there are particular deficiencies that you have, this is the time of year to get them done. You can do them in your own time. You can take them as gradually or slowly as you want. So that when you hit part 2, you're not having to relearn stuff from part 1, especially when it comes to portfolio work. If you have documents from part 1 to complete going into part 2, which you shouldn't have anyway, but it does happen sometimes, it's important that we actually have a look at that. The key thing here is if you have decided to leave the majority of your portfolio work until the summer, do yourself a favour and do it over the summer, okay? Again, I've spoken to students in the past and their plan's always been, yeah, I'm going to do my portfolio work over the summer, and I speak to them in the autumn term of part 2 and I'm like, well, did you do your portfolio work over the summer? And they say no. So if you've given yourself that rest in the normal term to do the majority, hopefully you've done some of the bits, but if there's still key elements you need to do, this is the time to do it. You have until October, or the start of term, which is the end of September, to get it done. So do that catching up, just so you're not under pressure moving forward. I can say that future you, and again, this is a comment from past students who have done the portfolio assessment, future you will thank you no end for a bit of input and a bit of effort over the next coming months. Again, it's not you having to work constantly every day on it, because it's not that much work involved. It's a significant amount of work, but again, you can get through it. But just dedicate some time over the summer to try and catch up with those points. So in terms of your timelines, I like to have it in here just so you know kind of what the expectations are, or sort of when and where. Obviously, with you guys in part 1, you're in our first step here. So your part 1 documents, you were kind of introduced to the portfolio back in, I think, end of October, maybe early November. I can't remember exact week it was. And you must aim to have these documents completed by September 2021. So what have we got? Maybe sort of 3 to 4 months to get that work up to date. Now, if you remember, the portfolio isn't actually handed in every year, but if you don't keep up with work, you just won't catch up in the later years, is kind of the way it works. So again, I will keep tabs to a certain extent on how people are doing. And we always ask tutors in tutor meetings to ask students specifically about their PAD portfolio and what they've been doing and what they've been up to. So if you hit September next year or this year and you tell me I haven't done any of my Part 1 work, well, that's just not going to be good enough, unfortunately. And you really need to look at how we address those, because you can't leave everything until the last minute, because you get busier and busier. Well, not say busier, but your work commitments are still there in all your other years. So if you're not been able to do it now, what's to say you'll be able to do it in the future to catch up? Obviously, as you move into part 2, you have a whole new set of requirements. So these will be introduced to you in October of 2021. I normally introduce it right at the beginning of term just so that you know what's ahead. And again, you have the entire 12 months to complete those part 2 work. Hopefully, once you've done part 1, you kind of know how to fill in documents. You kind of know what's expected. So it should, when I say should, be a little bit easier. There aren't dramatic changes in the documents you do. It's just some of the numbers change a little bit. Now, when you move into part 3, similar sort of plan, I suppose. So again, in October of 2022, which will be, you'll be introduced to what it is you need to do in part 3. But this time, rather than having the whole year, obviously the PAD portfolio is actually handed in part 3, so all that documents need to be completed by March. Because you have less time, October to March is fewer months than October to September, the amount of work that's involved is also less. So we change the document requirements depending on how long you have to complete them in reality. If I can say anything more about keeping up, please do not fall behind within the years, okay? Previous students will tell you over and over again, I've seen the Instagram posts where they say, please don't do it, keep up to date with it. If you're struggling, deal with it at your earliest possible that you can, because that's the easiest place to deal with it, okay? It's all about taking pressure off for later on years. If you're kind of thinking now, I'm not so worried, I'll catch up later, when you're in part 3, you're going to hate that person because you don't get extra time. There aren't no more hours in the day. So the reasons why you hadn't completed it originally are still probably going to be there in part 3. So please do think quite carefully about that and make sure that you're giving yourself ample time to do the things you need to do. I thought I'd put a very sort of quick bit about saying why the portfolio is so useful. Sorry, my screen's going a bit mad in the background. And I think this can be sometimes a little bit understated maybe in terms of why it's so important. I think it's really key that I make you think about why the portfolio is important, because a lot of people think of it as being a lot of work and actually what's the gain from it at the end. Well, number one, it helps you develop your reflective skills. Now you might think, well, why are reflective skills important? Surely I just can do something or I can't do something, which is true to a certain extent. But reflection is really the key tool that we all learn by. You can think about it when you're revising for your exams. Your revision process is you reflecting on the content that you've learned or reflecting on the skills that you've learned. So you're kind of doing that reflection. The portfolio is a way of getting you to write about what it is that you've learned. Why have you done certain things? What skills have you been developing? And it really helps the reflective learning. The best and most successful learners are going to be those reflective learners, because they don't just learn something that's in front of them, they link to why that's important. They are able to say, okay, I understand this. This is how it links into my other work. This is why it's important to me. This is how I've structured my way of learning and thinking. So it's all about having that sort of reflective thought in any of the learning that you do. Okay? So reflection is really key. As with what you'd have found with your exams, reflection does improve retention of information. The more time you spend going over information, the more you're likely to understand it, and that repetition finally goes in as retaining and understanding. It will go in there eventually, I promise you. So actually going over some of the skills and writing about some of the things that you've been learning is a way of you actually reflecting and retaining some of the information that you've learned. Really, really important. These are both kind of skills that you kind of develop without really knowing it, I suppose. So it does take time, but if you don't put the time in writing reflective documents or thinking about what it is you've learned, you actually miss out on these sorts of skills. So it is really, really important. The kind of portfolio as a whole is really trying to get you more engaged, or you may actually be well engaged already, but trying to make you feel more integrated into your chosen profession, which is pharmacy. That's why we're all here at the end of the day. We're trying to get you to a point at which you can be practicing pharmacists. So it's a way of you thinking about the subject in its kind of broader context. You're able to learn about some of the things that specifically you might find interesting. So again, we don't want you just to think about learning as being what I tell you need to learn or need to know. You can generate information, and we're starting to, and we do this all the time. We learn about lots of things that interest us. So just trying to link those points together by saying, let's get you feeling a little bit more incorporated in your future profession, make you a little bit more knowledgeable about your future profession. You may have good knowledge already, that's fine, but it's there to build that in. Allow you to expand some of the things that you're learning about, and when you are taking time to learn about another topic or related topics or skills that you're developing, it's actually having some sort of credit for that. And that's why having these reflections on, or CPDs on, topics that you've chosen are really important. It's about developing your skills and you as a person. So really important. It does help you develop your management and organisational skills. I think by the end of it, all students think about, actually they went back to step one, they would manage the task differently. So that kind of tells me by the end, they've learned how to manage a task appropriately. It's just a shame that sometimes it's taken them too long to do that for this particular task. So really think about how you structure your time, how you structure workload, how you organise your work, how you organise your writing, and how you kind of spread things out when you're a little bit more in charge of the work that you're doing. It's a good way of keeping records of all the important sessions that you've been involved with. So again, it's a good way for you to look back over what you've been studying and what you've learned in and out of university. So it's really important to have that record. So sometimes you may forget, you're like, I can't really remember, I think I did a session on this. Let me just check my portfolio. It'll be there. You can have a look over what it was specifically you learned, the dates where things happened, and that's really good for keeping track of the breadth of knowledge. These kind of records are always useful for employers because you can show to them, or you can showcase, look at all the things that I've done. This is how I found that they were important. Also, as a final point, it's a good way of showing off achievements. Lots of students, and again, when I read portfolios when they're completed, sometimes I do find it quite surprising the amount that some of you do, and it's really nice to have some appreciation or achievement sort of collation together to show actually what hard work you do put in the course, outside of the course, and you should get credit for that. So it's really there to show off yourselves as well, something to be proud of at the end of the day. Now I've put in a point about what I need to do now. So this is important for how we think about how we approach the summer. So these are some key points that I want you to engage with. Different people will need to engage with these differently. If you're fully up to date with everything and you completed everything in the normal sort of academic year, then you don't have to worry about writing a load of new documents over the summer. Your work is done. You may want to think about next year a little bit, but you've put the hard work in earlier on. If you haven't, then we need to start looking and addressing that now. So it's a good point to review the work you've done. So what I would do is I'd make a list of all the documents I have done and any documents that you need to complete. Now I'll take you to a space on Blackboard that will show you what you should have needed to have completed. Again, these lists are in multiple places. I've talked through them many, many times, but I'll still do it again because I still want to show you what's important. From that point, it's time to set yourself a plan of how and when you will complete these documents. So it might be that if you've got 5 more documents to complete and you say, okay, I've got 4 months now, I'm away on holiday, hopefully, for a month at some point. So therefore, I'm going to do 2 documents in July. I'm going to do a couple in August, and then I'm going to do the rest when I return back off my holiday, whenever that may be. okay? And try and stick to that. If you've set yourself a regimented plan, stick to it. If you want to do a lot of documents early and put a lot more hard work in those earlier months, maybe a good idea, and get them out of the way so you can relax a little bit more afterwards. That's a good plan. But again, spread out your work however fits you and what else is going on in your lives at the moment. Because you may have, you may be working, you may have other commitments as well. So again, it's about fitting it in around your lives. Obviously, you have to get to the point where you start working through your list of outstanding documents. So once you've identified what you've done and you've set yourself a bit of a plan, do make sure you actually complete the documents. Don't just write your plans and be like, okay, it's great, my plan's done. Now I'm going to forget about it for another 2 months. No, if your plan's there, do get those documents done. One thing that you can do, and again, I haven't spoken huge amounts about compiling your portfolio. There is a video on it if you want to see it, and I'll show you where that is. But you can actually start trying to put your portfolio together in our ePortfolio platform. So maybe if you've got all your documents ready, this might be the bit that you want to approach. Again, this is part that we can do at any point within the 3 years, really. It shouldn't take too long to compile, but we can have a look at that. Again, I have done a specific video on this, sort of taking you through how to do that. If you're all up to date, you don't need to start looking at part 2, okay? There's not a huge benefit to you doing part 2 early. Get done, what you need to get done, and then we can let part 2 deal with itself when we get to part 2. Just because I reintroduce everything and your expectations may be slightly differently, or our expectations may be slightly differently. If you want to have a look at the list of things you'll be doing next year, the lists are available to you. You just go to the part 2 tab rather than the part 1, okay? You do have multiple sessions next year that go through the part 2 work that you need to do, okay? So hopefully, and I say hopefully, people do forget from time to time, you know where all the student academic portfolio stuff is kind of collated. Now you would have had some teaching within the units that you've done this year. So PM1C is generally a space where we deliver some of the material. I generally copy it into this folder as well. If you want lists, templates, anything like that, all the background portfolio information is in this folder. It's under your organizations, well, I will say my organizations, but for you, it'll be your organizations. You won't have as many of these as I have. And you just need to go into your student development portfolio. I will switch into student view. It's a little bit less going on when I'm in student view, which is always helpful. So the key thing is, obviously you're part 1 pharmacy student. If you do want to have a look at what part 2 looks like, you can have a look at part 2, that's fine, but I wouldn't necessarily skip straight forward or straight through to that. If you go to part 1, what I've just done, and I only made this today, or whenever you're watching it, I made it on the 11th of June, sorry, is I've made a bit of a list of all the requirements. All the requirements can be found in the individual sections with a bit more detail as well, but this is kind of a general requirements list. Find more detail in the section that it relates to it. So you should have a learning needs analysis done and dusted. Tutor meeting records, again, depending on how many have taken place, at least one. This is where you're saying what happened in the tutor meeting. You should have a CV. Again, you've had sessions on writing CVs, I think, or if not, you will have them next year, but it's good to have a kind of a broad CV at this point, which you can work on in the future years. We have our business administration workbook to look at. So you've had a couple of lectures regarding business administration relating to pharmacy. So there's a little workbook, and I can have a look at that in a second. Kind of the bulk of the things that you need to do is there'll be 6 unplanned CPDs, so continuing professional development. This is where you've picked some topics that you wanted to learn about and are reflecting upon. Again, you had an introduction to CPDs from SOSIN earlier on in the year. So again, go back to that if you're not quite sure what to do with those, but you need to start formulating those and putting them together. Alongside your CPDs, there are 5 reflections on learning. So these are specific sessions that we've delivered to you this year, whether that's a placement or whether that's an interprofessional education session, so an IPE or an IPL, depending on what they're calling it at the moment. This is where you're reflecting what you learned in those specific sessions. Okay. Again, those specific sessions are compulsory. If you didn't attend them for whatever reason, you need to let me know, hopefully as soon as possible, just so that we can make sure that we know how to approach those moving forward. There are 5 drug monographs to complete as part of the clinical knowledge section. So Dr. Brazier went through with you in spring term how to complete a monograph. He gives you at least one example. I think you do 2 of the examples with him in class or in your online class. And there's another 3 that you'll need to complete entirely on your own. The final one is 2 reflections on feedback. So this is you reflecting on any work that you've got back at any point this year. This can be written feedback to an assignment. This can be verbal feedback from a session that you went to. It could be verbal feedback from other students that you've had to your particular work. It's about you thinking about what it is you learned from the feedback that you gained and how that's going to change you moving forward. So if the easiest ones are thinking things like PAMS classes, so your dispensing classes. If you look at the mistakes you've made in those PAMS classes, how is it going to change how you move forward to not make those mistakes in the future? That's what the reflection is there to do. So how can you help yourself not to make those mistakes in the future? Other important information. So the part 1 communications and announcements is where the stock information goes. Now if you look in here, we've got our CBA business qualification information in here. So if you want to find any information such as the workbook, it is here. You don't need to complete the whole workbook this year. We suggest that you do basically a third of it each year. So do have a look at that. There's some intro slides to the CBA as well. Important one here is I've done some video guides. Okay, so each of the sections, or each of the main sections, other than things like CVs I haven't done, but each of the main sections I've done a relatively short video guide about what you need to complete in those sections and how to go about completing the actual documents. Okay, so you can go into there. These are all YouTube videos, so you can click on those and you can watch them. So I've done one on sort of a PAD portfolio recap. I've done an introduction to CPDs. I've done an introduction to monographs. I've done an introduction to CBA, and then I've done the video here as to how you upload your documents to the ePortfolio platform. Again, you may want to have a go at doing this on your own. If you're struggling, there will be time for us to do this in parts 2 and 3. So again, if IT isn't your thing, we'll be able to support you as you go. But have a watch of that and see if it makes sense how you would start building that portfolio together. Because that's basically the final way you're handing it in, is via this ePortfolio platform. Other things that will be useful to you. So that's the kind of document information. If you need any of the templates to fill in your writing, please go here. You'll be going to the PADP forms and templates 2019 starters onwards because you started in 2020. And here are all those blank forms for you to fill in. Okay. Once you've completed them, there are 2 things that you can do. I would always say save them to your student OneDrive. It's always a good thing. Save them in multiple places if you're worried about losing them. But what you can also do to keep them safe is you can upload your documents to some submission points that I have made for you Part 1 students. Okay. So basically, here is pretty much the checklist that I'd have shown you in that list form. These are all the documents to complete for Part 1 as part of the portfolio. And what you can do is when you completed the document, you can upload it to the submission point and then it will be saved forever, basically. So if you're ever worried about losing your documents, upload them to these submission points. Now I sort of use these submission points as a bit of an overview, as a guide. I can see whether people have been using the submission points or not. The important thing to note is that your documents don't get marked here. Okay, so don't worry that if you've uploaded your CV here, that I'm going to use that and I'm going to mark that CV. It's just a repository for your documents to sit. So you can then go back to your submissions and then access them if you ended up losing them on your OneDrive or you can't find them. So use it as a kind of log, and what you can do is once you've submitted one thing to all of the checkpoints, you know that your work is done and you don't have to worry about it. Now from last year, not a lot of students actually used them. Don't necessarily know why necessarily. I thought they would be quite useful. So I haven't done it for the current part 2s, but again, I'll still give you the opportunity to use these. They will always be there. So it's a good place to upload your documents to keep track of what work you've been doing. Okay, I think that's kind of it. I think I just had a bit of a thank you slide at the end, if I can remember which is which. So thank you to listening and taking the time to watch this video. It is important to engage with this. The key point, and I probably will take you back very briefly, is that obviously under part 1, under your communications, if you want the really sort of depth video about everything portfolio related, go back to the week 9, actually I think it might be week 8, but go back to PM1C. I thought I'd update that. I know it is week 9, sorry, you can ignore me. Go back to PM1C, week number 9. I've done all the screencasts for all the sections for everything you need to know portfolio related. The only thing that will be different within that screencast is that we've taken out the staff tick essay, which was the research element this year, just because of complexities with COVID. So there's no green element for your portfolios this year. I just go back out. So in your research skills, there isn't a document for you to upload into that area for this year. So just leave that section blank. The research skills will start to come back in next year. It just didn't quite work out in terms of how we wanted to do that. So we felt it was made sense not to try and complicate matters. So there isn't a research skills document for you to need to worry about for part 1 this year. So as I said, thank you for listening. If you do have any questions over the summer, please do ask. If you can help it, please don't leave it until the very last week before term starts again. Just give yourself enough time. If you've got problems, I will respond to them. Obviously, I work normal times throughout the summer, so you don't need to worry that I'm going to be away for the 3 months that you're away. Obviously, I do have some annual leave, so give me a bit of a break in terms of if I don't respond straight away, but I will get back to any of your queries sent to emails when I can. The Padlets are available as well, which SOSA normally looks after. So again, we will try and monitor questions coming in. I'd probably say for the moment, use probably my email if you want a slightly more, a quicker answer to come back to you. If it's a little bit more general and you're not so concerned about the times, you can use those Padlets. Obviously, lastly, enjoy your holidays. Again, this isn't me saying that I want you to have to study the entirety of your summers, but do help yourselves out and get those documents done that you need to get done for part 1. And then I'll hopefully see you all again next term, and then we can start thinking about portfolio for part 2 as we move forward. Okay, thank you all for listening. That is it from me. Hopefully we'll see you all soon, and hopefully you found this useful, and good luck with completing the rest of your documents for part 1. Okay, see you all later.